folks that write this stuff off are not going to survive. And I think the truth is the smart people who are mentally elastic, no matter what age they are, understand. This is a new paradigm, y'all. Everybody get your hands dirty. Grab an agent, build something, bang your head against the wall, and then enter the future.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Human in the Loop, the most actionable AI show on the internet. I'm one of your co-hosts, Alex Lieberman, managing partner and co-founder of 10X. And I'm joined, as always, by my co-founder, Arman Hazarkani. And we are so excited for today's episode with Ryan Carson. Ryan is a legend. He is a 5-time founder. He is a builder in residence at AMP. And he's going to show us today what it truly means to be an AI engineer. If you know the show, you know I am not the engineer. My co-founder, Arman, aside from his good looks, is also a great engineer. And so Arman is going to be steering the show. I'm going to be here trying to ask somewhat intelligent questions as a non-technical. And this is going to be incredible. Ryan, before we hop into it, what can people expect to get from this show if they watch to the end?
So the goal is to build real stuff and cut out the fluff, right? You know, this is going to be real world. I'm going to literally ship a real feature. Probably things will go wrong. So expect real world stuff.
Love it. Let's do it. Arman, the keys are yours.
Awesome. Okay. So Ryan, why don't you give us an overview of like the current code base, like just set the stage with what you're trying to build. And then I'd love to understand like, what is the goal? Like, what is the feature that we're going to ship?
Okay. I'm going to talk about a couple things. One of the things I'm going to do is walk you through this repo and how I use it. So this is open source. I'm sure we'll put the link in the comments or in the show notes. But the reason why I built this is because, you know, I've spent a lot of time coding with agents and I figured out what works and what doesn't, right? So this is practical real world stuff. And I'm going to show you how I use it. We got some more people. Vireel's an engineer, investor, exec. Nice. Putting yourself through the ringer. And then let me talk to you about the code. So the interface I'm using here is just the CLI. I'm a big fan of Ghosty. So, you know, those of you out there are probably using either like VS Code or Cursor or Windsurf. They're all great options. I'm kind of more of a CLI guy because I like the cleanness of it. So I'm using Ghosty on a Mac. On the right, I've got
on that. Like,
do it.
Do you think that the tools matter? Like, does it matter what CLI or Ghosty or this or that, or are the concepts that we're going to talk about going to be agnostic to the tools?
They'll be agnostic. So I'm going to show you what I like, but it will work in anything, any environment you've got. So if you're an IDE type of person, right, you'd rather be in that environment, then you can run your agent on the command line inside that IDE. So that's fine. If you are on a Windows machine, you can run the same stuff on your command line. So, it's not locked in. It's the concepts that I'm going to show you. So the tools are fun and all of us love tools, but you know, don't get too hung up on that. Jamal says Ghosty plus Tmux. Nice. I actually literally just stopped using Tmux today. I went back to like native Ghosty panes. So sorry. Okay. So on the right, I have my agent of choice. Obviously I love AMP. You know, you can do this in Claude Code. You can do this in, the Codex CLI. You can do this in Gemini CLI. It does matter, but you can use any agent you want. So I've got AMP on the right, and on the left, I've got NeoVim, you know, just a good classic, terminal-based IDE. I actually use lazy Vim, and I love it. So now the code base. All right, so this is a Next.js app. I'm not going to go too hard on like how it works and what it is because I don't want to focus on my specific app. This is a startup I'm building. It's Next.js, TypeScript, Postgres, pretty standard stuff. So you should be able to apply these concepts. So, Daniel's saying warp is solid too. Yep. You want to zoom. All right. I'm going to zoom a little bit for everybody. Zoom. Here we go. Okay. So the code base again is pretty straightforward. This is, an AI divorce assistant that I'm building. Sadly, my sisters got divorced and they're happy and better now, but I decided that divorce should be less painful. So that's what I'm building here. It's essentially a specialized agent. So what I'm going to do is ship a real feature. So And again, Armand, just, interrupt me if you need to.
Yep.
But what I'm doing is number one, I'm going to speak most of my prompts. So this is like, simple, like hack number one is talk versus type as much as you can, because when it comes to context, you actually speak better context than you type. And the reason why is because you usually are hyper precise with your typing, especially if you're a developer. Whereas if you speak, you tend to give better context actually. So I'm going to do that. I'm using a tool called Whisperflow. I love it. I'm not an investor. I'm not getting paid to do that.
Can I ask you about this? Something that I've faced with Whisperflow is like, I agree with your concept of like, you're being too precise when you type out prompts. But what I've found is that precision is sometimes useful because it allows you to iterate on a prompt and redo a workflow. So how do you balance that with like the off the cuff, high fidelity, just like Whisperflow, I'm speaking my thoughts and that gets picked up by the LLM versus like having a templated prompt or like really thinking through how you're going to direct the flow?
Great call. So you need to do both, right? So I'm actually going to walk you through both modalities. I actually think you're very correct that sometimes your prompting needs to be very precise. So I'll show you an example / command. It's called ship, right? So ship is a very specific prompt that I run before I deploy to prod, right? So this is a good example, and I'll just read a little bit of this. So run the complete development quality checklist and prepare for development. Number one, code review. Check out the PR and unstage all commits. Look for foot guns, rookie mistakes, etc. Right. Number two, get status. And this is a very precise prompt, and I would not want to just blah this into existence using Whisperflow. So yes, that's a good example of where precise prompting matters a lot. Now, every agent you use is going to have custom / commands. Use them. Okay. This is tip number one, right? So figure out the prompts that you're going to use over and over again, and then codify them as custom / commands, and feel free to just steal mine. This is called ship. I use this over and over again. And essentially what this does is says, check out the code, run a code review on it. So one thing I love about AMP is called the Oracle. It's basically a custom tool called a GPT-5 that does pretty hardcore deep thinking on the PR. So use those custom / commands. Okay. The other thing, and I'm not going to try to pitch AMP here and get everybody to love it, but I will say one thing that's pretty great about it is it's free. So if you want a free agent, then just use AMP free. So you can see we've got a couple different modes here. So you've got plan, smart, free. We're just going to use free the whole time today to show you how that works. Okay. So let's speak in the first prompt and let's see how this goes. This is probably going to be messy. Keep the comments coming. I'm reading some of those out. Someone's asking about monologue, Whisperflow, 320K words since starting 16 weeks ago. Kyle's all in. So Whisperflow's great. Okay, here we go. Okay, so we need to ship a feature that logs the user out automatically to protect their information. We're using Clerk for authentication. Go ahead and create the PRD for me. Okay. So here we have a pretty rough and ready prompt. This is not great, right? You would not want to build a feature based off of this. So here's tip number one. So I'm going to tag a file. All right. It's called create PRD. And so we're going to let that cook for a minute in the background. But what I'm going to show you is what this is. So what I'm doing basically is I'm mixing, speaking with specific prompt techniques. So what this is over here, and again, this is free. This is just an open source repo. It's crazy. It's got 6,700 stars already. It's just 2 files, right? So I'm going to actually go into the create PRD markdown file. This is basically a custom prompt, right? You could use a / command if you wanted to. There's really no difference. And what you're doing is 4 steps first. So you receive the initial prompt, which was my primitive prompt about logging the user out. And then it's going to ask clarifying questions. So it says, before writing the PRD, the AI must ask the most essential clarifying questions to write a clear PRD. limit questions to 3 to 5 critical gaps in understanding. And then you see that happen right here, right? So we've got 4 questions, right? Now, the key here is that you're enforcing a step to clarify things, right? Because what will happen is if everybody is using an agent, you just get lazy and you get tired, right? And so this step is designed to enforce clarity, right? So let's just quickly answer these, right? So I'm actually going to talk. All right. Number 1, I think the session should expire based on a fixed time limit. Let's go 2 minutes. Number 2, I just answered that. How long should an activity period be? I would say, actually, let's switch to an hour for the inactivity. Number 3, should users receive a warning? Yes. Let's do a warning 2 minutes out. And then what information should the feature protect? Just all of it. And then also send them out to the homepage once they get logged out. Okay. So not rocket science here. We're just clarifying some of the key features, right? So we'll put that in.
Just so I can like recap to understand. So you have this, you're building this startup, right? And you want to add this feature, and you are basically, you're showing a balance between the Whisper flow with very, very structured and templated prompts, and using this to create a PRD for this feature. And we'll see what you do after the PRD. Just so I understand, that is what we're doing right now, right?
Yep. Yeah, we've got a feature for this app. And again, I'm not focusing too hard on what does my app do, because that's not relevant to all of you.
Yep.
But I have a feature I need to ship. It's probably a feature everybody understands. You probably want to log out your users if they have highly confidential data. So that's what we're building. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at, what it's doing over here. So let's find that the file. It's called PRD auto logout. Load it. Let's make that go away. Okay, so this is tip number 3. Read the thing, right? So the major step that people fail on is this one, right? It's pretty easy to get your agent to write a bunch of markdown. But the question, is it good and is it what you need, right? Is it, and think about it this way, you've got this super intelligent person. They just walked into your office, right? They don't have any context. So that's why you have to give them the right context, but then you have to explain exactly, which paths they need to take. This is actually a lot like managing employees, right? So what you learn as you manage employees, and I've been, fortunate to manage hundreds of employees over my career, is that you do have to get specific, right? People can't read your mind, right? So the agent can't read your mind either. So it's made some choices about feature implementation that we need to understand and approve or deny. So I'm going to read a little bit of this because this is what you should do. But I'm not going to read the whole thing because it'll bore you to death. So we've got some user stories, right? Those are are fine, but let's focus on the functional requirements right here, right? Okay. So the system must track user activity across all pages interactions. Yep. That's true. The system must automatically log out users after 1 hour of inactivity. Sounds right. System must display a warning notification 2 minutes out. Allow users to dismiss the warning, continue. Yep. System must redirect to the homepage. Sounds good. System must use clerk's authentication. Yep. System must protect all data. Yep. Fine. Some of this is extra, right? So I'm actually going to delete some of this is just the model, I think, being verbose. The rest of this looks pretty good. Success metrics. Actually, this is pretty good. Now, this is a pretty easy feature. I think, normally, when I do this stuff, sometimes I'll be planning for like 2 hours, right? So the other day I shipped a huge feature where we basically decided to remove the paywall to the app so that you could sign up truly without a credit card. And I remember I basically sat, chatted to AMP for almost 2 hours before we had a finalized PRD and task list. So, stuff to think about.
One question I have here is, now as you think about the bottlenecks in your engineering process today versus what it looked like prior to all this? Is the big bottleneck now kind of like the planning and then the reviewing of the plan that has been created for you? And do you view there's any way to speed that up? Or at the end of the day, you want to review every line of this plan to make sure it's executed on properly? Like, is there no kind of shortcutting that?
There's not right now. I anticipate, as the models get better, you will start to offload some of the plan checking to agents itself, but we're just not there yet, right? There isn't enough practical sense in the models yet for you to trust that. So I would say that this is the slowest part. After this, the slowest part is ironing out, the tiny little bugs that happen during the implementation. And I will say, tip number 5 or 6 or whatever we're on here is you want to give the model eyes. And what I mean by that is you want the feedback loop on this thing to be something the model can ingest. So here's one way that I do that. I'll show you actually. All right. So I'll just tell the model, check logs. So this is another tip. So I have a custom / command called CL. And it's kind of dumb. It's basically an autocomplete, and it says check server logs at least 100 lines. Now, the reason why is because I've piped in, so it's actually looking at the logs right now. These are the server logs that automatically get piped into a log file. Now, why is that important? The reason why is because the model can't understand what's going on unless you tell it where the output is, right? And so a lot of devs are like copying and pasting stuff. What you want to do is give the model the ability to check for itself. And in Next.js, another kind of tip there is that you can have the front end logs piped to the server log. This is a custom feature that Next.js, you can just turn it on. And so all my front end logs are going right to the same log file as the server log. So Kyle says, unified logging seems very underappreciated in the agent workflow. Yeah. Because in the end, you realize like the agent needs to be able to know everything I know. Like, how can it know that otherwise? Otherwise, you're going to have to spin up Playwright and say, all right, check, use Playwright to check the browser console, which is just like a whole step you don't need to take. So, okay, I digress. Let's go ahead and keep going. And let me recap what we've done, right? So the idea is we've got here, in our task folder over here, we have an auto-generated PRD, right? So it's this markdown. And then with this markdown PRD, we're going to generate a detailed implementation plan, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to tag the PRD. I know that it already knows this, but this is an idea of like refreshing the context, right? So we want the freshest version of this PRD to be in the context. So I'm going to tag it, and I'm going to say, let's go ahead and generate the detailed implementation plan. And then I'm going to tag the second file in this system, right? So it's called generates task list right here. You're probably wondering like, well, where are these files? What I've done is I've taken the open source repo and I've just brought those markdown files into a folder called agent props. So you could also, like I said, make these custom / commands. It's like whatever works for you. Okay, so what the agent is going to do now is read our PRD again, which again is kind of a basic feature, but it's more than just a vibe coded, crank it out in a couple of minutes feature. And then it's going to create a custom implementation plan as Markdown. So it's basically said, I've generated the high-level task based on the auto logout PRD requirements, ready to generate the subtasks. And so here's what its plan right now is. And again, this is all specified. Let me show you in the Markdown file. Okay, this is the generate task markdown file. It's pretty simple, right? It's saying, okay, the output is a markdown file. The location is in tasks. The file name is going to be task-feature name. And then the process is this: receive the requirements, right? So the requirements was our PRD that we inputted. It analyzes those requirements. And then phase one is to generate the parent tasks, right? So you wouldn't want the model just to like barf out, 25 tasks, right? You want to think iteratively about this. And again, this is like a meta piece of knowledge here. Abstract everything into multi-steps, right? Versus one-shotting. Like you never ever want to one-shot anything ever again. So don't do that. So what we have here is we've got our top 5 level tasks, right? Now, as the engineer, this is where we always say at AMP, don't outsource your thinking, right? You got to think, right? So let's look at this real quick. Okay, so task 0 is create a feature branch. Yep, that makes sense. We want to work on a branch here. All right, number 1, implement an activity tracking hook. Sounds right. Create warning notification component. Yep. Implement auto logout functionality. Then integrate an activity tracking. Number 5, add comprehensive tests. And number 6, update documentation and verify feature. I'm going to say, don't need step 6 because again, the models tend to over document. So we're going to do that. And then it says, okay, here's the 5 steps again that have been modified. And again, this is this planning feedback kind of loop. I'm actually going to say, I'd like you to add a step after the feature branch where you design the component first and show me what it looks like. This is something I've learned. Sometimes you can implement a whole feature and then you realize the model misinterpreted what the UI should look like. And everyone's wagging their head because we've all been through this pain, right? And so this is just a way to avoid that pain, right?
I also just want to highlight, we're 25 minutes in and not a single line of code's been written. And I think that is the point. We talk all the time to engineering leaders and senior engineers and just incredible engineers who have written off AI for engineering.
Oh my gosh.
And it's because what you said with Whisper Flow, the first thing that you said, they put that into Cursor a year and a half ago. It put out dog crap. And then they're like, oh, AI's bad. And they've just never tried it again. And I think what's really cool about this is, again, you are starting with writing a PRD, but you didn't one shot even the PRD. Even the PRD, you forced it to ask you questions. And then you're using that to create a plan, and you're not one shotting the plan. You're using that to ask questions. And then and then we'll see what happens after this. But that, I think, is the biggest thing here. And I think people need to take away. How do you instill this in people who have written it off? What is just stuff like this? Or you just go on podcasts and talk about how you build?
I mean, pretty much, and as well, maybe this sounds harsh and maybe it's because I'm old now and I've had kids and I just don't care anymore. But folks that write this stuff off are not going to survive. I mean, and it's not my job to save everybody, right? And I think the truth is the smart people who are mentally elastic, no matter what age they are, understand. This is a new paradigm, y'all. This is bigger than the computer, right? And so I think there's a lot of intelligent people that, were calcified and have been able to, break those chains. Actually, a really good example, I want to call him out, is Dario, one of the key engineers at AMP. He is extremely intelligent. He's one of the best of the best of the best engineers, right? And when AI first came out, AI as far as large language models, coding, he was like, this is going to be a bunch of slop. There's just no way this is any good. And then he heard his dad in that sentence. And he was like, whoa, I sound like my dad. And he's like, what happened? And so then he said, wait a minute, like I have to open my mind and realize that like AI engineers might actually be better than me. And I need to be open to that. So it takes a lot of humility, right? And a lot of like introspection. And so the best of the best are going to be able to do that, right? They're going to be humble. They're going to be hungry. They're going to be elastic, to realize that. And then he basically independently came up with a system that was almost exactly like AI Dev Task, this whole system, which is like, okay, let's plan a PRD. Let's plan an implementation plan, and then let's execute it slowly and carefully. Let's give the agent ways to see. And so it's almost like we're all evolving like independently into like a similar engineering structure. So if you're watching this and maybe your boss like doesn't believe this stuff, like leave and go to a different company. If your board doesn't understand these things, have them watch the show.
On the implementation plan that you're going through, and you walk through the 5 steps of that implementation plan.
Yep.
One thing that you had shared, and this has been instilled in me by Armand and the engineers since day one at 10X, is like, you don't want one shot an entire code base, right? You break it into all these component parts and you just continue to massage it and work with it so that there isn't basically this decay as you go from task to task. When you're looking at the steps in an implementation plan, what is your mental model for saying like, this is an appropriately sized task for what I want the model to work with and actually complete, or this is too small and we can combine tasks, or this is too big, we need to break it down? How do you think through that?
So unfortunately, there's no other way to learn this than doing. And I'm sure everyone, that is watching that has done this understands what I mean, is that you start off with asking the model to do way too much, right? You fail, even if you plan it well. Like you realize, oh my God, this PRD should have been like 5 features, right? And you fail. And hopefully you run a branch. And then, and then you walk it back and you try again. And then you basically get this feel for what the model is capable of. And it only comes by doing, right? So you've got to like get your hands dirty. And this is what I keep saying to people is just use the models, right? You literally don't have an excuse. AMP is free now. So like if you want to do that, it's free now. Get out there, try to build a feature, and see what works and what doesn't. What you'll end up finding out is that it's probably like a day of work max is really what you should be building. If you can't ship it, to prod in one day, it's probably way too much. So,
can I ask you a follow up on that?
Yeah.
Like generating that feel, I think is like, if you take a step back and forget about AI, like Alex, I think like the way that you could frame that question as well is like, how can you define a task that you can delegate to a junior employee, right?
Yes.
But what's good is that most junior employees are somewhat similar. And if you manage a junior employee for 2 years, you kind of know what they can handle. I think what's really tough about developing that same feel for AI is that these models are getting better so fast, so quickly. And not only the models, now we have the application layer with agents that are also getting better. So like there's another vector that we have to measure progress in. And we get this question all the time. I see people asking in the chat, how do you keep track of that feel with all these different variables that are changing?
I mean, it's hard. There's just basically no other way than doing it. So I'll tell you a couple things like, and you'll see actually the model just made a mistake there and I had to go back and do it. And basically it started implementing first and didn't create the branch. Like this stuff happens, right? And so I think part of this is just learning, well, how do you deal with stuff, when it goes wrong? So what I just did there is I tabbed back up and said, create the feature branch first, and then it did it. Now it's cranking again. So, we're in an age, I think, where it's funny. And I tweeted this out the other day, people thought that agents were going to end the work of engineers, right? And actually it's 180 degrees the opposite, right? What it turns out is that if you're willing to be technical, and learn, you can actually do 10x as more, as you all know. But if you don't, then you're going to be absolutely left behind. So I think we have to sort of go into this mode of saying, I'm going to now become even more technical because I can be. And I want to give everybody some encouragement. Like, yes, I have a computer science degree, but I got it 25 years ago. Like, I'm not some new engineer, that's like some cracked, engineer that's doing, 996 here. I'm kind of an old guy that basically retaught myself how to code with agents. And I've become this technical, and anybody can do this if they're curious. You can. And even if it's not, you don't end up shipping to prod, like if you're leading a team and you are shipping things on your own or on the side or at home, then it makes you more credible, more powerful, and more intelligent. So
is what you're saying, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, is what you're saying that the people who use Lovable, V0, Replit, who have no computer science background, can also use this exact same workflow. This is not necessarily for people who have engineering backgrounds. Is that correct?
Yeah. Amen. Yes. Now, is it going to happen quick and is it going to be easy? No. Right. So there's going to be a lot of pain along the way, but it's just like working out. I mean, it turns out there's like no shortcuts ever in life, right? For anything ever. So what I am saying is that if you are willing to do hard work and you're willing to go through pain, absolutely, you can actually become an engineer, right? You can start with a Lovable, with a Bolt to ship your first app and have that feeling. And then you can transition into a really good agent like an AMP or a Claude Code, and then take that and go further. But yes, anybody can do this. And the reason why I know that is, so my last startup was called Treehouse, and we taught 1 million people how to code, right? So I know a lot about how to learn, how to teach people how to code. And I'll tell you, if they had an agent like this, then anybody can learn how to code. So,
that's awesome.
So what's happening here, it's just cranking, right? So if we go over, it looks like it's basically done implementing, it's running a build. And there'll be a lot of testing and checking here to see if it's working correctly. But the gist of what to do here, I showed you live, right? So it's pretty exciting.
Can I ask you another question?
As many as you want.
Something that we hear is like, I'm trying to touch on a bunch of the different things that I hear when I talk to companies. One of them is like, if you don't know how to code, you can't use these things. You just debunked that. Another one is, I was talking to a company today. They said, we have 1 million lines of code that have been developed over 15 years. So every new CTO or senior VP of engineering or whatever that's come in has brought in a different pattern that they prefer for developing an API or a component on the front end or whatever it may be. And so there's no pattern that is the source of truth in the code base. We've seen a lot on Twitter. People talk about AI is great for startups, but it's awful for like big legacy code bases. What do you think about that? Does this workflow work for huge legacy code bases?
Absolutely. But with care, right? So, I'm showing you another screen here. We'll zoom in a little bit. This is lazy Git, just to kind of show you what's going on the Git side of things. So now with large code bases, I think what you have to understand here is that, just like there isn't any easy fix, if you brought in a consultant, there's not going to be a fix just because you're using agents, right? I think with large legacy code bases, we have a first world example with Booking. So Booking.com, they happen to be a customer of AMP, and they're completely replatforming from, I believe it's Perl, right, to a modern stack. And what they're finding is that, you can replatform an entire code base much faster with AI engineering, because you can refactor a lot faster, right? So yes, I think what happens as well is your backlog gets plowed through a lot faster. You'll have a lot of these technical debt issues, right? Where now you're able to deploy, an agent pretty fast to get something that you feel comfortable with and then ship that. Whereas you probably just wouldn't have time to even get to that backlog before, right?
As we were talking about all these things, you are still building this feature. So let's bring it back to that. What's the current status of the feature?
Yeah. So what you're looking at here is lazy Git, which is just a TUI way to see what's happening inside of Git. I would actually encourage you, like, if you're using an agent, try using lazy Git, because it gives you a visual understanding of like what is happening here with this branch, like what's checked out, what's checked in, what's happening, right? And again, the more technical you can become, the more powerful you'll become, right? So you can see on the left here, these are the changes. I'm going to make this a little bigger for y'all. Actually, you can go even bigger. Okay. So we modified the layout of the app, right? So, and again, looking at a diff is also a good way to get used to coding with agents, right? You need to get pretty comfortable with like, okay, what changed and what didn't, and how do I review that? So right now I'm in our main layout for the app, and you can start to see, okay, what actually happened here. We removed the chat area and the signed in bit. We've got the conditional help button moving around. So just a couple changes in that file. In our components, so these are a couple brand new components. You can see it's all green, right? So this is all new code. And again, this depending on where our friends that are watching. I see some friends in the audience. Tim, what's up? Good to see you. Keep those comments coming in. We live off them. This is technical, yes, but just keep in mind, like, I hadn't shipped code to production. Let me just walk you through the story, and like, so you don't feel as bad watching this. So I got my computer science degree. I was a web developer, but basically a web developer. I wasn't shipping like crazy C-level, systems. And then I started my first company, which I built myself. That was acquired. And then my second company, I started hiring devs, right? And by the time I built Treehouse, we had a CTO, a VP of engineering managers, product managers, designers. I had this whole apparatus, and I stopped coding. And then Treehouse was acquired. And then back in I think it was like mid 22, 23, started teaching myself how to code again with large language models. And now I'm to the point where like I can look at a diff and lazy Git and I feel completely comfortable. So you all can do this, right? You just have to put in the time and the effort and be uncomfortable, right? So what we're seeing here is, all right, the agent, wrote some new code for this component. This is pretty straightforward. This is the warning. This is the actual TSX, right? So we're looking at this as a call out. It's got alert triangle, and it's talking about you're going to be logged out of a certain amount of time. So you're just kind of understanding like what happened here when the agent was working. We've got a couple of hooks that trigger the warning, and then we've got the PRD, which we worked on, and the tasks, which we worked on. So that's basically what happened. But let's go back into the other. We've got Ghosty over here. You can see on the left, part of the system I have is just remember to check these things off as you do them. So the agent is coming here, checking off tasks as it finishes them. And this is a slight modification. So when I shipped this repo, I think over a year ago, there was a third step where it basically said, okay, agent, you're only allowed to do one task at a time. And I have to say continue every time. And if you remember these days, like hit me up in the comments and say, I remember when you had to like have your agent on a tight leash, and you couldn't let it do much. But now, I mean, the agent can pretty much execute this plan, autonomously, and you can check on it. So that's kind of what happened here. So got a bunch of good questions as well. Armand, I'll let you kind of, or Alex, I'll let you kind of guide us here on how you want to take this.
Yeah, no. So Joe was saying a cool resource for us would be suggested tech stack by use case for front end and back end. Like I feel like, and this reminds me of just the question in the very beginning. Let me see if I can find it. Someone was basically like, how do you stay up to date with kind of the pace of changes to these models and to these products? Because this is something that even Armand and I talk about all the time with our engineers is like, if we were to ask our engineers today what their go-to stack was for their AI workflows, and we were to ask them last week, and we were to ask them next week, they would all be different likely. And so I think that's that's both exciting because the pace of change in this technology, but it can be like nauseating. How do you try to stay on top? Like basically, what is your process for testing and optimizing your workflow without it like almost becoming counterproductive?
Yeah. So I'll tell you, the first thing I'll do is I'll pitch a show that I always listen to, which is called How I AI by Clairvaux.
Yep, we're big fans of Claire.
Now, in addition to 10X and everything you're doing, everybody should subscribe to this, right? So this is a good way of like, I just need to make sure that I'm vaguely aware of what's going on. And Claire, has a 30-minute show and you get up to date pretty fast. So that's one show that really matters. I think the other thing I'll say is maybe listen to like 2 podcasts and that's it, right? Because it does become overwhelming. And I would say if you start to build something, then it will give you essentially, what do you need to know to stay up to date? So for instance, why am I on Next.js? So when I wanted to build my first app, I was like, okay, I want a interactive front end, so I know Python, so I'll write the back end in Python and the front end and, some sort of JavaScript framework. And then I was like, oh, how do I do this? And then I was like, oh, Next.js is TypeScript, front end, back end. I'm just going to choose that. And so I'll say, if you're overwhelmed by this, then just start building one thing and cut out the noise, right? I think, so for instance, you could get obsessed with like, well, am I using the right model? Am I using the right stack? Am I using the right PRD? But I would say it's easy to become overwhelmed. And I think you just need to build, right? Because it starts to cut out the noise, right? So if you say, I have an idea for an app and I just need to understand how to do this stuff, then pick something you care about, right? And it could be, you know a lot about flooring tiles and you want to ship a simple app that helps people buy, from wholesale better. Okay. Just use Next.js. I'll just tell you that. Like if you want a stack, just choose Next.js. The agents are really good at it, right? And just start there. Probably ship it on Vercel because it makes deploying easy. Use a Postgres database from Vercel, so probably Neon. There's a couple of these choices that just do them and don't be obsessed with every single little detail. And then ship your first thing. And then you'll be like, okay, here's what I need to care about, right? And eventually you'll end up sort of adapting. Like today, I just signed up for Linear because I'm like, I need to track, my issues better. So, versus like, I need to set up my perfect stack from day one, which will paralyze you.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you a similar question, but about like your AI stack, because we're getting a few different questions about this. I think what's like when ChatGPT first came out and we were all using 3.5, like the workflow was like there was one model, there was one tool, there was one workflow, right?
Yep.
Now there are dozens of models, each with competing skills or whatever. Like they each do different things. They're each good at different things, but like there's a bunch of different models. There's a bunch of different applications, right? Whether it's AMP, Cursor, Claude Code, ChatGPT, Claude. There's a bunch of different apps. And then there's a number of workflows. And what you just walked us through, I would say is a workflow, but I'm sure you have a bunch of other workflows. What do you think people should spend most of their time optimizing? Because we saw a bunch of questions about what is the best model. And a lot of people argue about Cursor versus Claude Code versus AMP versus whatever. And then, but what I've seen is that a really good workflow is what takes you from like crap to production. And so my bias is that last one, but I'm curious how you think about this.
Yeah, you can get paralyzed with model choice alone. And so this is actually part of the reason I joined AMP. So, I'm a founder, I'm a builder. Like it's not normal to join a company as an employer. And the reason why I joined AMP is because one of the many reasons is they're very entrepreneurial as a team, but they don't have a model selector. Right. And so what do I mean by that? Well, so when you're using various agents, sometimes you have to choose the model. And the problem is knowing what model for the right task is very hard to do. And so I would say, and again, AMP is free. So we're not making revenue off you by using it. But if you use it, we don't have a model selector. And the whole reason why is because building the agent harness, right? All of the elbow grease you have to put in around the large language model is very hard, and it's very dependent on the specific model, right? So Gemini 2.5 Flash is different than Gemini 2.5 Flash Lite, is different than Pro, is different than GPT-5. Like, they all have extremely different behaviors, right? And so I would say, honestly, just use AMP. Like, the point is you don't have to choose the model. So let's say you do that. I think then when it comes to everything else you have to choose, and I'm sorry, my Sheltie is still barking, but
he's a fan of the show.
He is. He wants to be an AI engineer. So, and then otherwise, like, as soon as you get paralyzed by tool choice, then you're doing something wrong, right? The point is to ship something, right? And so I think if you start to obsess about, oh my God, maybe I should be using RAG, with this type of, search, and then maybe I should be doing graph versus node. It's just like, nope, you're doing it wrong. Like, simplify and then build and then come back and then optimized, right? Ship and then learn. The other things, I mean, some of it's just fun choice. Like, okay, I use Markdown for everything. Markdown is great for agents. I use various APIs all the time. So I use the API for Google Analytics because I can quickly build a marketing dashboard that I care about with the one chart that I care about. An AMP can crank that out in an hour. And then I have the dashboard that I need with, Markdown from my repo where I need it. Like, you can customize, a lot from that. So that's what I would say on tool choice.
Some people may have joined midway through. So can you just do a quick recap on the workflow that you shared? And then we'll finish with questions from the crew.
Okay. So everybody, what we did is we built a simple feature. Okay. So we had a PRD for a feature. So the first thing we did is, okay, we want to build a feature for an app. How do we do that? And we started off by creating a product requirements doc, or a PRD. And I did that by using a two file system that I built, called AI Dev Task. So this is a free, resource. You can fork it, you can clone it, you can do anything you want. It's got 2 files in it. Create PRD, which is basically a prompt, right? So what we did is we went in here and we spoke to it and said something like this. Hey, we need to build a feature, to automatically log out the user so that their data is not compromised. And then what we did is we tagged that PRD prompt, right? And then that ended up through some iteration, right? It wasn't a one shot. We ended up with this PRD. We modified it a little bit. We edited it. And then when we were done with that, then what we did is we said, okay, we're going to tag that PRD. And then we're going to say, generate task to implement. And then we tag this other file, which is called generate tasks. This is, again, a prompt that helps the agent build the correct implementation plan, right? So it's called generate tasks. Again, this is really just a detailed prompt, right? It generates detailed tasks based on the PRD, and then you end up with something like this, right? A detailed implementation plan with all the right files that it needs to use, some notes, and then a detailed implementation plan. And then I haven't checked it yet, but we got it to the point where I could start testing it. So that's what we did up until now. We're using AMP on the right here. We're using NeoVim on the left. And we're building it all in Next.js. So that's what we did so far.
This is great. This was awesome. Now we have 8 minutes until we're at the hour, but I don't want to keep everyone for the whole show if we don't need to. If you have any questions that haven't been answered yet, drop them in the chat, and we'll fire them off to Ryan before we're done. In the meantime, while I wait to see if there's any questions, I have to ask the question that is always the controversial one that Arman and I talk about with engineers. Arman feels fervently that MCP is just marketing, and it at its core is just an API. Is Arman right or wrong?
Arman is 100% correct.
Oh, let's go.
So here's the deal. Like, MCP is very happy. MCP is useful. Sometimes, right? So I basically have one MCP. It's the Chrome DevTools MCP, which occasionally makes my life easier, right? But the point is the agent is way better at running bash commands, which are essentially tools, than you could possibly imagine, right? So give it a good, give it a good CLI tool, right? And ask it to run the commands yourself, providing you the right context. So, and I don't want to say that MCP is bad, but it's not very good right now. Right. So don't, rely on it as your savior. So,
yeah. And my take on the whole MCP thing more than anything, like, do I think that it makes sense to build a standard for tool creation that you can hand over to any agent? Like, of course. Right. But do I think that people making YouTube videos with the title, like MCP just took your job, like that's for, you know what I mean? Like I think people are pretending like it's this crazy thing, and it literally is just like a JSON schema on an API. Like, you know what I mean? So that's the thing. Yeah.
But this is a good commentary on the way people should think about these things. Like, there is truth in both statements. Yeah, MCP is going to kind of take your job, like in some sort of theoretical future format, because what you actually mean is the entire workflow is changing, right? Yeah. And so pay attention to that. Like, agents have tools now. Okay. So what can agents do with tools? Like, and then I think Andre Karpathy's, interview with Dorkesh was good, because he basically said, listen, like, this is a lot of elbow grease, right? Yeah. And this is why 10X is so successful. Like, companies need to understand like how to actually implement these things. And it's not a wand, and it's not a magic incantation. It's a lot of elbow grease, right? Mm. But that doesn't mean it's not real. And so I would say, man, everybody get your hands dirty. Like, grab an agent, build something, bang your head against the wall, and then enter the future, right? Where the vertical agent is going to take your job. So you want to build the vertical agent, and be a part of the wave instead of get just drowned by it.
Love it. One more question for you. And this is from Joe Smith. Joe asked, how do you feel about security with vibe coding, or bring in AI engineering to vibe coding? Because I know they're very different things. What's your thought on the security piece of this?
Man, it's so important. And so this is scary and important. And I would say, it absolutely does matter. And the thing you should do always, always, always is have a more intelligent model review every single PR. Right. So that ship command that I showed everybody at the beginning of the show, in AMP, we have something called the Oracle, which is basically a call out to a specialized GPT-5 agent. And you say, review my code, look for security holes, look for foot guns, look for rookie mistakes. And you will find stuff almost on every PR. And it's kind of scary sometimes. You're like, oh my God, like that API endpoint was not authenticated. That's kind of terrifying, right? So yeah, you got to care, and you have to pay attention. But then again, remember, we actually talked about this at a dinner I was at recently, where it's like, remember as well, like, a lot of the code that's written right now by human engineers is not good either. So it's not like magically something is changing here. It's like you always have to pay attention to security. Yeah, whether the agent is writing or you do. So do your job.
I love this last question from Sunny. Sunny said, tools are fantastic, but as you add more tools, the reliability for the right tool call diminishes. How do you solve that?
Have less MCPs is maybe one. And then if you're building agents, which a lot of us are building hyper-verticalized, specialized agents, you're going to want, a couple of the right tools. In the end, just remember, an agent is very simple. It's a loop, with a fixed length of memory, right? And you have to figure out, just like a human, like if the human walked into your office, you wouldn't be able to like barf the entire information of the company on them and give them all the books and expect them to be successful. You'd have to say, here's the book you need for this task, rock and roll. So I think, be smart about that. I have at max 2 MCPs running. And then I try to trim it from there.
Love it. Ryan, this was awesome. You're the man. Can't wait to meet in New York soon. Thanks so much for doing this.
This is fun. Thanks for having me. Trying to take care, everybody.
Appreciate you.